Do you want to know the difference between pros and rookies on remodel projects? Pros do this one thing first every single time. It's not sexy, but it's what keeps your project on budget and your stress level down. Today, I'm talking with Tracy Royce, an investor, flipper, and remodel expert. She's going to walk you through exactly how she does it so you can copy it for your own remodel projects. If we haven't met yet, my name is Chad Carson. You can also call me Coach Carson. And on this show, I teach you how to use real estate investing to achieve financial freedom so you can spend your time doing more of what matters. Now let's get to my conversation with Tracy. So Tracy, I found like the best deals in real estate usually needed remodeling. And then some of the worst deals I've ever seen, both the ones I've done and also I've seen people lose a lot of money, also needed remodeling. So
Right.
There's this amount of anxiety and also just mystery about remodeling houses that you've done a lot of remodels yourself. You've taught a lot of people to remodel. So I want you to help us take some of that anxiety and that mystery away. And I'm thinking the first question I would love for you to share with us is when people are newer to the remodeling process, do you have a common mistake or what's the most common mistake those people make that maybe pros who've been doing it for a long time don't make?
So when you had proposed this conversation, I was so excited to nerd out on this with you because I think it's something that's often overlooked to a lot of people's detriment and especially financially. So I'm really glad that we get to dig into this today. And one of the main things I want to put out there, because your audience spans beginners, but also people that have maybe done some remodels, how successfully is debatable. But one of the first things I want to put out from all the conversations I constantly have with people is that you do not have to be a contractor to be able to do this well, but you do have to take a lot of responsibility for the control of things. And so I really want to offer a more stable, regimented way to approach your remodels. And I hope that your audience gets a lot of takeaways from this. So guys, take notes, please jot something down, record this, whatever you need to do, revisit it, because I don't want you guys to be so intimidated when you come across deals that seem like they're pretty juicy and they need a rehab versus going at it with some false bravado and then understanding months later that you've wasted time, a lot of money, and maybe it's missing the market of what it actually needed.
Right.
So to answer your first question, yes, one of the biggest things that I see newbie people make is they get excited and they think like, I've posted all these things on my Pinterest board. I've been watching other rehabbers on Instagram. Now I have this house. Someone finally said yes. I think I'm doing a deal, but gosh, I'm just going to put all this design into it, my heart and my soul and financials be darned. So one of the things that really keeps us in line is spreadsheets and a walkthrough guide that you'll hear me reference quite a bit. But if I can say one simple thing to begin with is this is not emotional. It is another piece of meat, and you need to look at it from an analytical and quantitative standpoint. And then the qualitative part comes in where, cool design and understanding what's going to help it move a little bit faster is quite important, but not as important as the underlying underwriting.
Right. So I'm thinking like I watch the HGTV shows with my daughters and they love them because there's this emotional transformation. And that is really appealing to see. It was ugly and now it's beautiful. And look at these designs. And that's the cool, like the sexy TV part of it. But what I'm hearing you say is as a new investor, you kind of go directly to that and don't start with like the nitty gritty, boring spreadsheets and lists and just analytical side of it. And that's the mistake a lot of new people make.
One of the things you really have to consider is most remodels, even on the very low end, if you're proficient and have your trades lined up or you have a GC that's just knocking this stuff out, a cosmetic update can be, a couple weeks, 2-3 weeks. A full remodel can be 8 weeks. It's still if you're proficient. So you're really thinking about spending a lot of time, a lot of money, a lot of bandwidth to get into something, and you should be really well rewarded for that. Going back to the same question of, what is the mistake that I see a lot of newbie people make is they just go in and start doing the John Wayne approach, which is the pointing and shooting. And I think this needs to be done. And my contractor said this, and I saw this. And then my partner said this. And then it just gets so chaotic in terms of what needs to be done that people don't understand that if they had taken the time, even 30 minutes more to look through the financials of it to say, is this a viable, and by viable, I mean profitable project, then I wouldn't have wasted 3, 4, 5, 6 months of my time, 50 grand, 100 grand, whatever it is, and then come away thinking rehabs just don't work. Well, they didn't work because you didn't follow the fundamentals. And most people don't really want to hear that. Like, listen, I think that the TV shows are really entertaining, but I also think that they've been done a massive disservice to people in this space.
Absolutely. So we need a system. We need a process. It sounds like pros, people who do this consistently, have some kind of analytical system. So I'd love to kind of get inside your head. If somebody who's done this a lot, here's a deal, Tracy. It's a new deal. It's in your sweet spot. It's one that you would definitely be interested in that neighborhood. What would be like chronologically the first things you would do? Maybe even like you don't even own this house yet. You're just like, you're looking at a prospect. Like, how would you first start thinking about a remodel from a more analytical standpoint? Are there any steps you would do? Would you go out to the property right away? Like, I just want to hear what you would do first.
Yeah, you're asking the right questions. So first and foremost, I decide, is it even worth starting the car? Is it even worth getting into going out there to look at it more thoroughly? Now, you hit the nail on the head when you said it fits your buy box, right? So a lot of times what rehabbers end up doing is thinking, hey, this one needs rehab. I've been waiting so long to get a good deal or get a deal that someone said yes, and it's okay if I do this, and I've never done a burnt down house, but maybe if I do that. So you really have to be clear on, is this the type of scope I want to stay within? I'm going to use the example that I use with a lot of my flip school students, which is I would like to see you in a cosmetic, low turn time, easy scope to begin with. Just get your feet wet. Anyone that has ever hired a contractor in their entire life understands that it's probably going to be a little bit more complicated from the get-go. And so I don't want you to be overwhelmed by the process. So if you are not clear on your buy box, that's kind of mistake number one. If you don't know where to start, think of entry level, move up price point perhaps. But the bigger thing about that is scope. Now, if all of those fall within what I'm looking for or what you're looking for, then I go into the comps. Are other people flipping in this neighborhood? Can I find other well-done rehabs to see what the top price that I can get for this, the ARV? A lot of your listeners understand that, what I'm talking about. So it's like, what can I get if I do this house nicely such that it's worth it for me to go through the throes of this entire process? So first of all, I'm looking, are there 3, 4, 5 comps to be able to justify this? And then the next thing I want to know is, what have they done that I can distill down almost to a template to apply to the property that I'm looking at? I'm not trying to reinvent the wheel. Of course, I do my stuff a little bit more boutique-y. I'm not high volume, but regardless, I don't need to reinvent everything that needs to be done to this property. I need to look at, what is the market telling me that they want and need? And then how do I be able to translate that, if you are not a contractor, which most of your audience I'm assuming is not, to be able to get the same output and then also stay on budget and stay on time. So if all of those things line up, then yes, I will go out and do a more thorough outline of what needs to be done. But a lot of the times, honestly, Chad, it's not going to fit all of those. One or multiple pieces of this are not going to fall in line. And that's when I also tell people, you cannot be emotional and try to make this a deal. It's not a deal. Don't make it a deal. Wait till a better one comes along.
I think that's a great place to start. I'm glad you went there, because we're going to get into spreadsheets and estimating and having these line item lists. The first question I'm hearing you say is it even worth doing all that work? Because you don't want to go spend a bunch of time analyzing every single line item of a repair if it doesn't meet in a fundamental buy box. And so that's the term I use too. It's like the buy box, I usually describe it as like a location, a type of property. But I like what you also added to that is this a type of remodel, a scope of remodel that fits into your wheelhouse? So like, I'd be curious for you, Tracy, what you think. Like, there's the cosmetic rehab where you're just doing a little bit of, the thing just needs some paint, freshening up and cleaning. Like literally, like there's not, you're not going to be changing anything other than, painting and cleaning. All the way to the other end, I would assume, is you have a 120-year-old house that has foundation issues, that you have to gut every single thing in the whole house, every kitchen, every bathroom, all the wiring, all the plumbing. So like, on what spectrum of that, like from almost turnkey to that, you're saying like most people should start on like a light cosmetic. And I wonder if you could define what that means. Like, what does that mean compared to like a full gut rehab?
So if you think of the light remodel as what you said, maybe flooring, hardware, changing out some things, fixtures, but you're in and out in a couple weeks, versus the next level up might be, hey, I'm opening a wall between the kitchen and the living room for an open concept. Maybe I'm doing a little bit of added square footage, which starts to get into a bigger rehab potentially. But essentially the footprint is staying the same, but most of the systems somehow need to be touched, if not completely redone, which also some of what we're talking about overlap here. So what I'm typically proposing is that people start between the first and the second, between a cosmetic and a mid-level. If you have something that's just cosmetic, most of the time you're not going to have a big margin. I don't know how things are in your neck of the woods. I'll speak from my own perspective, which is Phoenix. We are so competitive. So when you think about the formulas that people used to be able to say, like, hey, 70 cents on the dollar minus all the repairs, minus this and that just frankly doesn't fly most of the time. So I also like to see at least a 10% profit, no matter what you're doing on a cosmetic or a mid-level flip. When you get into a higher range of scope, you need to be compensated for that as well, and probably have a little bit more buffer as well. So when you are considering, does this fall within my scope, then that might look like I do need to do flooring. I need to scrape the ceilings for popcorn ceiling. Again, that's a regional thing. Paint, baseboards, doors, hardware. Bathrooms probably need some love, if not remodeling. When you're talking about a full remodel, you're talking about systems, roofing, windows, maybe some foundational work, maybe adding an addition on there. So below that, but between a mid-level and a cosmetic is really, I think, the sweet spot for beginners.
Got it. Kind of a sweet spot in risk, sweet spot in time, and ability to do it. So it sounds like, so for example, $500,000 property, if you're flipping that, or I'm curious also for you as a rental property, because we have a lot of people who just buy rentals and don't flip anything. So either way, you got to have some kind of profit goal or some kind of number that you're like, hey, for me to do this remodel at this level, at this scope, this is the price I need to buy it at in order to have enough equity or enough profit above that. And so you're saying start with that, is it in your location? Does it meet your goal from a profit standpoint at that price? And then is this too much for me to take on, or is this right in my sweet spot? That's a great place to start, because the mistakes I've seen people make with remodels has been kind of getting in over their head. Like they're doing like $150,000 remodel that has a ton of contingencies that can go wrong. And they're pretty new to the remodeling world. That's a mismatch of scope for their level of investing.
Yeah. And it's a giant mismatch in understanding and skill. I mean, think of it, if you've only maybe ever done a rehab on your own house, and then you're trying to apply that to an investment property where the timeline is condensed, the risk is higher, and your understanding of what needs to happen in order of operations, you're really just opening yourself up.
Somebody who gets in over their head. So the biggest mistakes I've seen people make is where they get totally in over their head. They're relatively new to remodels. They've done a couple of cosmetic remodels on their own, but then now they're going to do a $150,000 gut remodel where they're ripping out the kitchen and the baths. It's just, they're way over their skill level. And so what I'm hearing you say is not only does the deal have to make sense and pencil from a numbers standpoint, whether it's a rental or a flip, but it also needs to meet your own abilities. Otherwise that's a problem.
Yes. I'll give you a great example. So yesterday, actually, I received a DM from another contractor, and he was telling me how he had gone over to this house for the buyer's agent to do an inspection, and it was a flip. And he sent me a laundry list of pictures that he had taken, and it was so bad. Just the most Mickey Mouse, unbelievable, this has to be a meme sort of installs, and the finishes might have been something trendy, but just the quality of work was concerning, to be frank. And then he showed me where they were about to cut the trusses to put in a vent hood, and the roof had been done completely wrong. And I asked, was this a brand new flipper? And he said she was. And he put together what needed to be done. And he said it's probably going to be around 50 grand worth of work just to get it to pass inspection. And he was kind enough and resourceful enough to say, I'm going to help her fix this to be able, so she can at least sell it. But she has a hard money loan, and she was just way in over her head. And, I don't know this person, but I said, this has got to be probably financially, I would imagine, nearly devastating for her too, because whatever she put into it and then what she has to do now, she was just way in over her head. And that just happened yesterday. It's a cautionary tale, but unfortunately it's more common than you think. And maybe I'm a little bit, I have those conversations a lot, so maybe I see it a little bit differently, but that's fairly common. Yes.
I see it as well. And so I think, okay. I think the main message that I'm hearing you say is if you match up to the type of property that meets your skills, you might not make as much money on that particular deal. You might have to be more realistic about those numbers, but you're going to be successful in that. You're going to hit a single, to use a baseball metaphor. You might not hit a home run, you'll hit a single, but you'll be on base, right? You'll get there and you can score later on.
We love the base hits. And that's the same thing, again, I tell my students is we go for base hit and base hit and base hit. And it also really has to do with your confidence. Listen, if you're constantly exposing yourself to something and it's not working out, aren't you going to think this just isn't working and this isn't a good business? Again, backing up into, have you taken the time to develop the skill sets and processes and treat it like a business such that it is profitable? And you don't you and I have the same sort of credo where it doesn't take a lot to be successful with this. If the average price point in the US now is around $450, and you make a rounded 10% profit, so you're figuring around 40 grand or so, pop off 2 or 3 of those a year. That can be a really nice side hustle that doesn't drive you absolutely nuts, absolutely can be life-changing for your finances if you apply the profits, strategically. And it also is enough for you to be able to gain confidence in applying that towards, do I want to do multifamily? Do I want to maybe apply this to my rental properties instead of just flipping? So again, it's not like the most appealing thumbnail to put it in YouTube, but sometimes slow and steady in those basics and just building the confidence and having a better understanding. If you want to progress from there, please do grow as big as you can or want to. However, I think it's really difficult for people to hear, like, don't go for the home run to begin with. Let's introduce you, build your confidence, build the skill set, and go from there.
All right. So hopefully people receive that message well. I think it's a good message. So let's say they do that and they find a deal that is in their buy box that is, a little bit above, in between a light cosmetic and a medium cosmetic. What would be the next things you would do now that is a green light? You're like, oh, that's interesting. So my buy box, how would you start evaluating this specifically from the physical part of the property and understanding, like, how big of a remodel is this? What should I do? You mentioned like looking at comps and saying, what are the other flips or what are the other rentals look like? So maybe that's a starting point, but what would be the next thing for you to do?
Right. Yeah. So this is the nerdy stuff that I love. So you hit the nail on the head. Essentially just looking at like kind product that would apply towards yours. That an appraiser, and I say appraiser specifically because if it's off market, typically, at least in my county, they cannot use off market properties to compare to. So I'm looking at other publicly sold houses that I can say, hey, appraiser, they did this. And so that's how we're justifying this price. Now, of course, I am oversimplifying a little bit, but I want to make that the framework of what any rehabber or someone rehabbing should do to begin with, again, with the numbers in mind, not with, did I pick out the best countertops? Is this going to go viral on Instagram? When you look at these properties, right, your comps, you're looking at, is there a common denominator between the 3, 4, 5 of these? And I'll just use a template that's really common right now. Shaker or thin shaker white cabinets or oak. Right? White oak. If you have wood look laminate flooring, if you have matte black fixtures, if you have white quartz countertops, if you have 4.5, 5-inch, 6-inch baseboards, whatever is more popular in your area, you're going to start to see a menu of items that most rehabbers are using that's on trend, that appeals to a lot of buyers, that also is easy for them to replicate. Now, that doesn't necessarily show you what do they do behind the walls. So I want to figure out, are they putting in new windows? If all of your comps put in new windows, might you think that has to be a line item? Certainly so. Don't make it a deal. It has to be done. If they have new roofs, if people are demanding new systems, which in a buyer's market, they typically are. And a lot of times people want to overlook that and focus on the pretty stuff. So the next step, essentially what I'm getting at, is going through those and really through an analytical lens, saying, what are all of these doing that I'm going to need to apply to mine? And then just start breaking it down. That's sort of the beginner start of where your scope's going to be without doing a physical walkthrough to begin with.
And it sounds, unfortunately for people who want a shortcut on this one, it sounds like there's just some research that has to be done of your market, especially if this is your first deal. And I'm thinking either whether it's a rental or a flip. I do the same thing with rentals. I do a lot of mystery shopping. I do a lot of, like, early in my rental career in Clemson, I would go on open houses on like dozens of other rentals just to see my competition. So it sounds like the theme here is flip, rental. There's just some work that has to be done of shopping and being a shopper and thinking like a shopper. Like I always tell people, it has to be almost intuitive. Like when you look up a house, you're like, oh yeah, that's right in the market. That's exactly what the finishes are typically are. Whereas if you're not certain of that, or you either have to do the homework yourself, or you have to have a really good realtor, manager, partner who can know it really well too. Like one of the two, you can't avoid that step of market research.
So there's two things I want to go back to with that. The first one would be when you're saying, hey, pick out a really good property manager and agent. There is a piece of that where it's really important to have people that are experienced on your team. But I also want to make sure that people understand that your role in this, as not being a contractor, is you have to be directive and you have to be decisive. Yeah. I say this in all love, but when it comes to making decisions, it is not a democracy. Right? I am ultimately the chooser, but I'm also ultimately financially responsible for all of this. Long after everybody else has been paid, guess who is left either with the profit or the consequence of those decisions? It's not the tile installer, right? It's us. And the other thing I want to say is I'd love to dig into that for a second. When you're thinking about your scope on a rental property, and I'd love to hear your take on this. I think the old mindset used to be is like just cheap and quick and ready because they're going to beat it up. Whereas if you think of the premium that you will get for less turnover, less maintenance, higher appraisal, is I don't do a ton different when I'm picking up a rental versus a flip. I want to front load all of that. So I attract better tenants. I get higher rents. I don't have to send in handymen all the time and nickel and dime everything to tape this thing together for years. I want to deliver a beautiful property. And amazingly, people act different. You will attract a different set of tenants when it's like, this person cares about this. This is a nice house. I want to be a good tenant.
Yeah. One of my pet peeves, Tracy, is when people say, well, oh, you can spend a lot less on this one because it's just a rental. And I'm like, no, it's not. Like, I'm going to own this for the next 20 or 30 years. And any kind of shortcuts I take are going to be like costing me. And the joke's on me. Like if I put cheap stuff in there, I'll be replacing it 3 years from now. If I put not as quality of, the aesthetics aren't as high quality, I'm not going to get as good a tenant. Like the best tenants in town, and that's what's changed in this market from a landlord standpoint is, these things shift. Like for 5 years, I told landlord it was like really easy market because there's a limited supply of rentals. There weren't, every good renter was looking for a place and they were jumping on it, but it was the equivalent of like bidding up purchase properties, But now it's like a more normal rental property where you have like a lot of supply and renters have their choices. So it's back to like, as an investor, you have to invest in your property. You can't be like a slumlord who doesn't fix anything and puts a crappy product on the market. You actually have to make it nice. And I'm not saying you have to put like, high end. I have some 1-bedroom and studios and a college rental that are on the lower end of the rent range. Like, I don't have to put the same thing I would put on a luxury rental, but I do need to have the nicest thing in that price range. And definitely from a quality standpoint, I've learned this lesson the hard way, Tracy, is I did the cheap, remodels early on. And then I ended up, I've looked at my CapEx replacement maintenance over the last 15, 20 years. And it's paid, I've had to pay 2 or 3 times more because I had bad materials in the first place. So it's a bad lesson on the front end to go cheap on that kind of stuff.
You're going to pay for it either way. So the question really is do you want to pay for it now, or do you want to pay for it intermittently with the stress and headaches and constant turnover? And part of it is about getting the look. And this applies also to flips. You don't have to go out and buy the restoration hardware chandelier. You can certainly get a dupe. If you're doing that in your flips, in your rental properties, of course you want to pick out fixtures that are almost commercial level of quality, right? Oh, I don't want to put Moen. I don't want to put this in my rentals. Why? They have a warranty that if it ever breaks, like, you can replace it. They're going to be using these things hundreds of times a day, and you want them to last for a decade. And most things don't anymore. So when you are picking out materials and thinking about your scope on your rental properties, I actually think that it takes a little bit more thoughtfulness than when you're deciding for a buyer that you're never going to see again. And once the house is sold, it's sold, and essentially is whatever the new owners want to do with it.
Yeah. I have the best rental investors I know. They have like, they use the same fixtures and all in terms of like the brand, so that their plumber has, they have, whether it's Moen or, Delta or whatever they use, like they use the same thing over and over again, from the paint materials to everything else. Like, there's an efficiency. It also, they can choose the quality up front, and then they can use that over and over and over again. And so 100% on that, agree with that. I wonder, like, so you have in mind, like, the types of finishes you want to have, you have, an idea. Can you unpack this idea of a scope of work? Because I find a lot of people skip this step, and partly it's like they want to kind of, sometimes you want a shortcut. You're like, well, is it 30,000 remodel costs, or is it 75,000? They just go straight to the cost before they get to this list of things. And everything I've seen is people like you, Tracy, who do a lot of remodels. You make these pretty detailed, comprehensive lists. So can you unpack that? Like, what is the scope of work? Why do we do that? What's it look like for you when you're going to look at a property?
Yes. I love digging into this stuff. So I use a walkthrough guide, and it's something that I'll offer for your listeners as well within my school community. All you have to do is jump in our SKOOL, and I'm sure the link will probably be in the description. And when you come in there, you'll see that the community manager offers that. It's this walkthrough guide that essentially just keeps you honest. Instead of doing the John Wayne theory where you're walking through with the contractor and, let's do the countertops and the cabinets and change that light out, and you're kind of just shooting from the hip, asks you from the second that you walk up to this property, what needs to be done from the exterior, the roof, the windows, the foundation, the siding, the fencing, any and all of that. Oh man, Tracy, you're so mean. You're already talking about this expensive stuff. And I just want to focus on the before and after of the interior transformation. But we'll get there, right? So we go through the front door and then it asks you room by room, of course, kitchens, bathrooms. And so essentially you're just distilling down, this is in great condition. I don't need to change this. I've already looked at my comps. I can keep these things potentially, or this does need to be done. And I'm going through line by line by line, even things down to like the hinges. Do the hinges need to be changed out? Those aren't expensive, but little things like that add up and people want to glaze over the details. Again, I think because of excitement, a little bit of ignorance, but mostly like someone finally said yes, hallelujah, I'm going to flip this house and nothing can go wrong. Whereas when you rely on these bumper guards of Excel spreadsheets, walkthrough guides, understanding your cost, just enough to be able to make a directive to the contractors, that's what's really going to make this, dare I say, pleasurable to be able to rehab your houses such that means like you're profitable. It turned out really well. It sold faster. There's obviously a pride of work in what you do. And you feel like I can do this more. I do want to do this more. So again, just coming through a lens of practicality as, fun as that might sound, will do you wonders to be able to build your skill set and also paradoxically build the confidence from your contractors and what you're capable of as well. Meaning, if I don't have a construction background, which I didn't, and at this point I'm a licensed general contractor. Now it took me time to get there, right? But when I got started, I'm like, I don't know what this stuff means. And are they going to rip me off? Are they going to take advantage of me? And I think a lot of people might feel that way because they've heard horror stories or they themselves just feel ignorant. But again, the theme of what I said at the beginning was you don't have to be the contractor. You just need to have control. Control means here are 3 comps. Here's the output that we need to do. I showed up an hour early before I'm meeting with you, Mr. Contractor, and I've distilled down what I think the scope of work is going to be. But I need your expertise so we can work together to understand what the bid and estimate and breakdown needs to be. Now, do you think that your contractor would take it a little bit more seriously if you proposed it like that? Or if you showed up to do your walkthrough and you're just kind of like, well, I think it needs this and I kind of want to do this accent wall because I saw that on Pinterest and someone said I should do this and let's just overhaul that and raise the roof. And they're like, man, this is someone that seems a bit chaotic. So that is one way that you can really take control without having to be a contractor. And then you also really have this breakdown that keeps you honest. Like, I don't think that this is going to be a deal. I don't think that I can afford to do what needs to be done to get to that ARV.
So the benefit of this scope of work, I'm just going to relay it back to you and tell me if I miss anything, is number one, you have this contractor, this relationship with your contractor, which I want to get into a little bit more, where it shows that you have thought it through. You're the project manager. You're in charge. Here's my list of everything I think needs to be done. I'm open to feedback, Mr. and Mrs. Contractor, but like this is my start. That's one thing. The second thing I imagine is you are less likely to miss something when you have a checklist, when you have like a list of everything in the property broken down in little components. There's things that even as a 20-year investor, you're going to forget. Oh, forgot about that thing. Even like the hinges and the door plates and the light switches, things like, oh, I forgot that part of it. So number 2, it helps you not forget. And then number 3, I would assume it kind of translates that vision you had of here are the comps into like a specific project. Like here, eventually you're going to want to do a budget around that. So it's like you're breaking down, instead of being a fuzzy vision, you're like, no, here is how the project's going to be done. So the kitchen has to be done this way, the roof needs to be done. So it's just an organized way, I guess, of translating a vision into a reality at the beginning of it. Is that miss anything on that?
You didn't. I think you got it really thoroughly. And again, I can't stress enough how much it makes a difference when you're vetting and working with contractors. Certainly, if you can attract and keep a investor-friendly contractor, they're going to give you their expertise and feedback of like, hey, I know that you found this flooring, but I can get a very similar look at a supply house for this. Okay, great. Or I see other rehabbers doing this. Maybe you should consider that. I love that for us. However, when you are saying, what would you do to this property? Most contractors are just going to do whatever they think needs to be done without your profitability in mind, because why would they? And it's not uncommon for the contractors to end up making more, the hard money lenders to make more, or the agents to make more than you as a flipper at the end of the day, because you didn't have the cost control and the analytics and the direction and decisiveness to steer all the kittens towards you being profitable. And again, I'm going to sound a little boring here, but I can't really relay how important that it is that you come at your projects with that sort of mindset so you do have longevity when it comes to rehabbing. And from a global perspective too, Chad, I mean, I think that when you have a skill set like understanding enough with rehabs, that applies to every aspect of your real estate business. Even if you're not doing the PM, even if you have GCs or you get into commercial or whatever, typically we're going to be fixing stuff up, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So, whether it's one little flip a year or 20 or 200 flips a year or rental properties or commercial or whatever, I think the skill set is the more valuable thing, not necessarily like I understand every cost about every line itemization, on this estimate.
I agree. Yeah, it's the skill set of being in charge of your project. I am the project manager. I'm in charge. Here's the here's the list of things we're going to do. That's such a fundamental skill. And so I'm on board 100%. I'm going to be like a little bit of a devil's advocate, maybe people thinking about this and the nitty gritty. This gets really hard because we understand like, yes, we need to be thorough. We need to go through this whole list, but I have like 2 follow-up questions to that. One is, how long would that take you as somebody who's been doing this for years and you're now a GC and you flipped out? How long would it take you to put that list together on a property you're looking at? And then the follow-up question is like, if I'm just beginning to look at this property, I don't even know, I don't have it under contract yet. I'm just trying to like figure out, is this even a deal? There's this like kind of no man's land of like gray area where I just need to get like a rough idea. And yet I don't have time to go spending 2 hours and get my contractor out there yet because I haven't even negotiated. So how do you deal with that kind of reality, that kind of crazy space before you even get a property under contract?
That's a great question. So let's just address that first, because I'm sure enough of your audience will find this helpful too, instead of us kind of talking around things. So there's 2 quick and dirty ways that you can look at flips. Again, is there any meat on the bones? Do I need to do any further research? Because the whole thesis of us finding these great deals is looking through a lot. So you don't want to go through, I need to create a scope for 500 properties a week that are coming across my desk. Absolutely not. Really, back of the napkin math is 2 different ways. One of which is looking at the full retail value of the house and calculating 10 to 20% of the value of the house that can be considered the rehab cost. 10% obviously being cosmetic, 20% being on the upper end of a mid-level rehab, right? So if it's a $400,000 house, you're figuring around 40 grand. Super simple, right? The other thing is cost per square foot. Some investors, and I'd be interested to hear what some of, in your comment section, if people like this, if they don't like this, is using the cost per square footage. And again, one of the things that's really important when I say cost per square footage is from investor pricing, not I'm picking up the phone book and calling whatever Home Depot contractors can come out. I'm talking about like well-vetted, investor-friendly trades or contractors. Now that can be, depending on your neck of the woods, $15, $35 square foot, $50 a square foot, more than that if you're doing ground up. So if you're looking at 1,000 square foot house and you're applying, this is just a cosmetic remodel. So I'm going to start about $15 a square foot. It's a mid-level. I'm going to maybe apply around $35 a square foot, or I'm going to have to kind of tear this thing apart and put it back together nicely. It's going to be $50 a square foot plus. So when you're looking at things through the lens of, I have 10 minutes, is this worth me jumping in my, my seat behind my desktop to even look at this? And especially, is this worth it for me to jump in the car and go do a walkthrough and try to get the troops riled a little bit? Even just starting with something as simple as that is enough to say maybe yes or absolutely not.
That's really helpful. So I think it gives people permission. And as I understand it, it gives you permission to do that in the early stages when you're just trying to not waste your time. Of course, you're going to go before you actually spend money on this property and put it under contract. You then, then you do the scope of work where you say, I thought it was $15 a square foot because I thought it was a cosmetic remodel. It's 1,500 square feet. So that's like, what is that, 20 something thousand bucks. That was a good place to start. But once I get out there, I also realized that part of the foundation was rotted and the attic had issues and the roof needs to be replaced. And I didn't realize that. So then you can like adjust from there. But at least they would have said, you could have known from the beginning that it had a little bit of meat on the bone and it was worth looking at. And then I guess, so do you dig into it once you go out to look at the property? You then, like when you're going out to just inspect it in person because it looked like a good deal, do you then go through the whole scope of work? And how long does that take for you to do it these days.
And I'm sure that this never happens to anyone but me. But, when wholesale deals come across, they're notorious for saying it just needs flooring and paint, right? That never happens to any other investor.
Of course. Yeah.
Right. So when investors or even agents, and I always like to think that like people's heads are probably in the right place, but if they were a rehabber, they'd be rehabbing. And again, this comes back to, at the end of the day, who is financially responsible for this, for better or for worse? And it's not the agent that got paid. It's not the title agent that earned their escrow fees. Certainly not the wholesaler that got some massive rip. It's you as the fix and flipper or investor. And so when they say, hey, it only needs 20 grand, that's great. I'll maybe put that into my initial calculations if I've looked at whatever pictures are available. But to your point, when I go out there, yes, I'm using my walkthrough guide to go through what all needs to be done in comparison to the other comps to really get us to that ARV. And more often than not, I think that this is worth repeating because people often ask, well, how are you getting your deals? And I'm not coming across all these juicy deals. Because you either make them deals, right? In terms of it takes time to negotiate with people or they come back. And so it's not off the get-go that often it's like, this is just a great deal and it fell in my lap. Or you just pass on them. You're really just taking down the ones that are rarely, and I use that term subjectively, the great deals that really do make sense. And that's between what the scope needs to be, the price point, what the market data is telling you, all the things that we've already touched upon. But yes, to answer your question directly, I do look at what I think the initial range might be from what I've seen, maybe what I've been told, but often more of what I've seen. And then I get into it with the walkthrough and go out there. Now, I would suggest that if you do meet a contractor out there, show up an hour early before that they're supposed to meet. I want you to come up with what you see on the property so you can really make the best use of your time together. And it also shows that you are direct, that you show up on time, and that you know what you want. And then you want to engage their expertise. We are a team. Right? I want you to be able to do this. And in turn, I'm going to be decisive, pay you on time, have things clearly outlined, and we're going to work in collaboration to get this done. If you're not meeting with your contractor and this is one of your first few ones that you're doing, or even if you're not using something like the walkthrough guide, just give yourself about an hour, allow yourself to take some time. I think you'd be surprised when you're forced to go line by line, by room to look at how does this look? Does this need to be done? What about this? What about in comparison to that? So don't rush it. I mean, gosh, you can go to open houses or wholesale deals and just practice. Yeah. It might not be the most fun exercise, but it's a really, really valuable one.
Got it. So you practice doing the scope of work, you make a list, you go there an hour early. And so that next step that I do want to dig into a little bit is you have some kind of contractor who I assume is going to help you get an estimate. And so my first question there is, do you recommend people typically use a general contractor, like somebody who's going to have a bunch of subs that they hire out? Do you recommend somebody, especially on a lighter remodel where you might just do some, not a full gut remodel, going to the subs themselves? Like, hey, I'm going to call the flooring contractor and then the heating and air contractor. How do you decide that part of it? And then from there, do you have any tips on getting bids and getting estimates and not wasting their time, but still getting some accurate idea of what this is going to cost?
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. So I always recommend that, and I say the same thing with my students or just in general, in normal conversations, that people start off with general contractors. It's the same exact thing that I did. And especially if you don't have a construction background, you'd be surprised about how much detail and questions and oversight go into any part of rehabbing. And I'll use a really easy example, painting a room. You call a contractor and you say, hey, I want to paint this room. How much is it going to cost? Just tell me what it's going to cost. Well, is there drywall work that needs to be done? Do the ceilings need to be scraped? Is there dark colors in there? Are we doing this before we do that? Do you want me to, am I paying for paint? Who's paying for this? So you can see with one simple example, there's all these surrounding questions that go into who's responsible for what and what does it ultimately cost? And then who's paying for that, right? With a student that is under contract and about to sell her how she'll actually be closing in 2 days on her first flip. I had told her, use a general contractor. It's what I tell all my students. And even if she's like, Tracy, it's just cosmetic, I think I can handle it. Well, she ends up being in Hawaii. Well, this deal that came back online, remember how I said, like, sometimes you have to wait for these deals and people come back and you can negotiate with them. So that did happen. She actually lowered her price because the market had changed and the seller accepted that. And she remembered what I said. And so she hired a general contractor. And so while she was in Hawaii, everything got done for her. She had the scope. She knew what needed to be done. She gave him the comps. He knocked it out of the park while she was gone. And then she said, I had no idea that just doing what we did, resurfacing the cabinets, countertops, flooring, baseboards, interior, exterior paint, some landscape cleanup would take so much. And she goes, I'm so glad that I listened to you. Now, there's also a premium for watching how things go in terms of order of operations, in terms of communication, in terms of, is this a good person for me to work with, or is this someone I can't really jive with? Also, a huge takeaway is if you're not working with a GC on these easy ones, how do you think that's going to translate when you have a bigger scope? You're going to look a little goofy, right? So you're thinking of it in terms of, I'm paying a little bit for an education. I'm also paying for the exposure and for me to best understand how to learn from this to apply to future deals. So there's really all these auxiliary benefits of starting off with general contractors, and you might decide, I don't want to do project management. I've heard, you say that a couple of times where it's like that maybe that should just be the GC and I'm walking the property 2 or 3 times a week. They know I'm around, but I'm not the one that's trying to schedule everyone. That's really on the GC to do that. Now, if at some point you do decide, hey, I do want to do this full time, maybe I should be hiring out my own trades, I'll save a little bit of money. Maybe you will, maybe you won't, right? That's a whole other skill set. So I really just encourage people to work with general contractors and build from there because of all the skill sets that you actually get with that.
I do want to get to pricing and how, but I think
Yes.
This is a really good point because sort of like choosing the type of remodel to tackle in the first place, this is such a personal thing. And I think I've made the mistake because I've been full-time real estate investor for 22 years. We did a lot of flips early on. I think we got too early into being our own GC in terms of our own project manager when I would have had such an education. And, I kind of justified it in the first place. Like, it's kind of a skinny deal and I want to make this profit. And, they're going to charge an extra 20% or whatever that number is, But over and over again, I'm kind of a B- remodeler. So I'm just say from where I am, but I think there's a lot of B- remodelers out there. Not everybody is like loves it, is really good at it. And I finally realized like my business partner and I, we're really good at finding deals. We're really good at the financing and the analytics. We're not the best project managers, and that's okay. So I had a mentor early in my business who used to say, you can make money with one of these 4 F's in real estate. You can make money finding deals. You can make money fixing them up. You can make money financing them or farming them out, meaning like managing them, selling them. And most people are not good at all 4.
Sure.
The ones you're not good at, find 1 or 2 you're good at, and then outsource the other ones. And we finally decided we are not that good at remodeling. Therefore, we're still the driver. Like we still control the project. This is the end result we want. We're very, we write all the checks. But we've started hiring GCs for all of our projects, even though I've done dozens of remodel projects myself. So it's like I love that. I love that advice because it's about knowing yourself and what you're good at and where you're going to try to make money. And especially early on, you need to have that education from a GC who's been doing this a lot. So I think that's just, I'm validating your advice with my own personal story here.
And if that person grows with you too on the next one, they know what it's like to work with Chad. They know what your contract looks like, or they know how involved or not involved you're going to be in terms of picking finishes or whatever as an example. Can we do our own taxes? Can we wash our own cars? Can we do all? We can, but should we is the bigger question. And again, I really want to circle back to that idea of you are going to pay for it one way or the other. And when expediency is part of the challenge with this, is it best for you to be going out and trying to find trades and then schedule them, especially if they've never worked together? And then you're trying to fumble your way through all these questions, and then there's delays. And construction is construction, right? There's going to be delays. There's going to be things that pop up that we can't expect. And so, I think it's a healthier way, like you said, to acknowledge what is my highest and best use of my time. And can I take the sting of paying a little bit more for that premium, but go to market 3 weeks earlier than it would have taken me if I tried to coordinate all this? The other thing I think that you had asked was with getting estimates, if you are especially brand new to construction or you just don't have a construction background and you're like, I showed up an hour early. I did what I think is a decent scope. And now I can ask them more specific questions. I can show them my comps. Do I get them out there to do an estimate? One thing that I would say is off the bat, just have transparency. Call these people up and say, hey, I'd like to do a walkthrough. This is an investment property. I'm not under contract yet. And I have what I think is going to be the scope. I'd like to go through that with you. our appointment's at 1, I'm going to be there at noon, so I'll meet you there. And how much do you charge for an hourly walkthrough? That part is the most important. And I'd really like for you guys to like even write that down. So next time you're talking to a contractor, it's something that comes to mind. And there's a couple different reasons for it. One of which it says, I value your time. I do not expect you to give an estimate for free, because they're going to hear a couple different things. One of which is you're an investor and they're like, oh Lord, I do not want to work with an investor. That is not a good fit for you regardless. There you should be someone that like, yeah, I see the value in working with investors, but I digress. The other thing is I also will pay you for your time. And there's that law of reciprocity where it's like, hey, I put a little mint in your check when I delivered the bill. I might give you a little bit more tip. Can I pay you $150 or $100 or whatever your fee is to come out and do this walkthrough? Because I might need to do a few of them. And I want you to answer my call when that property does come in to say, yeah, this is going to be our base hit. This is the one that we should take down. Otherwise, they're going to see your number come up and like, I don't want to deal with this lady. I don't want to deal with this guy. He just kind of wastes my time. But if they know, hey, I might earn $100 or a couple $100 to do these, yeah, I see that they're serious and they're out there and they give me a breakdown of what they think that we need. We rap about it for a little bit. I just need to come up with the bid for them. This seems like someone I could work with. Might I expect that same level of leadership and control when it comes to us actually working together on a project?
That's such a good tip. I love that. My follow-up question would be, I'm going to tell you something I've done, and maybe this is the wrong way to do it. And I want to see what you would think. So often I'll have those those meetings, and it has to be, I want to be respectful of their time. I do offer to pay them for their time as well. But do you ever ask somebody to give you like, hey, you know what, instead of just like a full, like detailed, calling all your subs to figure this out, like just give me like a ballpark. Like, I'm not going to hold you to this. Like, can you just give me, is this $50,000? Is it $80,000? Is it in that ball, like kind of like a ballpark bid? And then if I get the deal under contract, then I go back to them and say, I need a contract now where we actually kind of bid this out. Like, is that a reasonable approach to do it that way?
Yeah. And I think that that's a really valuable question to ask for the audience at large, right? Because a lot of us are looking at things and having to make decisions in 10 minutes or 24 hours or whatever it is. And contractors often can't do line itemized bids unless they're super proficient. And if I can go off on a little bit of a detour here to mention that even in the construction industry, especially on the residential side, it is always an ongoing conversation, if not battle, of bidding correctly, right? It's not like, hey, us as GCs, we got it all figured out and we're just not telling you the secret formula for, homeowners or investors. It's something that is quite complicated. So if you're wondering, like, how do I know how much stuff costs? You and I had talked about, well, let's not necessarily get into the nitty gritty of line itemization of this is how much it costs for tile or this is how much it costs for a roof, because there's so many questions around each of those things that it's more important that you understand how to approach this. And then in your region, in your neighborhood, and whatever time of the year that you're listening to this, as far as, how old this podcast is at this time, is better understanding like what are the costs now and coming back to, okay, is that fitting for the budget that I have to be able to get this property to full market value? Now, I'll come back from my detour to say, yes, I think it's very fair to say I underwrote this at around a $35,000, $40,000 rehab. I don't think it really does a lot of good to hold things so close to your chest that you're like, I better get a number out of him before I tell him what my budget is. Now, if you want to say like, hey man, I'm trying to stay around 35 on this, but your upper budget has a contingency built in and you're really around 40, that's fair, right? But if it's a $100,000 rehab, arguably between multiple and different contractors that would bid about the same, and you're like, I need to stay around 35, you're kind of just wasting everyone's time. Right. So that's why I like to say like, hey, let's put a scope together first, what you think it is. If you need to look at it from the method of the retail value times a certain percentage, 10 to 20%, compare that to a price per square footage, there's going to be a more narrow range of where that lands. So let's say it's between like 35 and 45,000. And then I think it's very fair to say, based on what I'm seeing and based on the numbers, I need to be around 40, right? 35, 40.
Yeah, that's helpful because this business is always a little bit messy. You're going out and looking at deals, you're making offers, you're making multiple offers like you've talked about. You have to balance this like being accurate with being fast and getting things done. And I think that's real. Like I'm glad to hear that it's not totally off to do that. But ultimately what I'm hearing too is that you're going to build relationships with general contractors and contractors who can help you give you real numbers. You're going to be in charge of your project. You're going to build a scope of work. You're going to have comps that tell you what the end product needs to look like. And then you get to this point where you get a bid, you finally get a deal under contract. And is there anything else? So that's kind of the whole process before you even buy the property. But is there anything else you would say for investors out there who are trying to go through this scope of work and estimating process? What else have we missed that we should have talked about, or maybe we didn't get into in that whole process?
One of the topics that comes up fairly often is well, what if the contractor comes in at 50 and I'm at 40, right? And I think that that's a really fair real world example that a lot of us have run into, will continue to run into. I really want to encourage people not to steer it towards, hey man, can you cut your costs? I need to be at 40. Well, where is that going to come from, right? And oftentimes people are like, well, these contractors are charging a 20%. Well, they have to profit. And are you going to go where it's not profitable for you? Of course not. So where that conversation should go is, do you mind if we dig into this a little bit more? Because we're not terribly far off, but maybe there's something in here that we can collaborate on a little bit better to get us closer to the budget I need to be. And you know just as well as I do, there's going to be stuff that pops up. So I really need to cap it around that 40 mark. Well, maybe they've been getting their cabinets not from a direct supplier. Maybe they've just been using the same place for a long time. The prices have gone insane. And there's a new supply house in town that builds and ships everything locally. It's a discounted cost, right? Or flooring, instead of the $6 per foot LVP, you found something for $250 per square foot. It's like, so is there some sort of compromise that we can figure out without diluting the scope just for the sake of trying to save money that will keep us from getting that ARV, where you and I as a team can figure out how that's going to work. And it might not in every case, but again, it's not just about the actual cost of it, Chad. It's more about the principle of the conversation. I'm not saying, can you cut your costs? You're a contractor. I need you to work dirt cheap because I didn't buy right. Or could it be, we're not that far off. Are there a couple things in here that we can try to see if it makes more sense to exchange what product we're using or material or something like that?
Yeah, it takes the conversation to like, we're on the same side of the table collaborating to get this project done. And I think every contractor in the world appreciates a budget and understands a budget and understands that the money's got to come from somewhere. So that, yeah, if you like tap into their creativity, they might be able to use a different supply house. They might also say, well, I scoped it out with this LVP. To flip the house or to rent it, we could probably use this one. It's not going to be quite as durable, but maybe that saves you a little bit. I mean, they could actually give you choices. They say A or B. You can make that choice, and you may or may not make that choice. But that's so helpful, and it also just aligns with the way you live your life. Like you talked a couple times here about not being like the typical investor who's like cheap on contractors. So many investors complain about contractors, but think about the other way around. Like investors are typically cheap. They're not paying people for their time. They're asking a whole lot out of the contractor. They are, being a difficult client. You have the potential to be like different than the other investors by treating contractors well. And if you do, like my favorite relationships in business have been like 15, 20 years long. Like you don't have to like rotate in and out of like, if you have a team you've used for 10, 20 years, like what a difference. How fast do things work when you trust each other? So this is a long game. Like don't play the short game of trying to, be cheap on people.
I'm so glad that you mentioned that. Some of my guys that I've worked with, I've had for 6, 7, 8, 9 years. And it makes such a world of difference when I can pick up the phone, have the roll off there, as soon as escrow hits, and be able to do my job well. I can't operate without a good team. I am only as good as the proficiency and the people around me. And a lot of that has come from leadership and decisiveness. And then again, running things through analytics, because if I'm not profitable, what good am I to feed everyone around me if I'm not making it work well? This could be a whole other podcast, but one of the things I would like to offer as you do your first, second, third flip, have even if it's a Google Drive document, everything that you've spent as compared to flooring costs, cabinetry costs, labor costs. And then you can even have AI look at it and say, hey, you're spending about 12% of the full market value on this, or there's cheaper ways to be able to do this, or considering doing it that. So construction has been around since, we were apes using tools and making caves and, rehabbing our caves. And it's going to be here, until we're being blasted off into space. But that said, I think that there's this really big opportunity right now to marry the old school with construction, old school construction with the new school technology to be really proficient at what we do and augment some of this frustrating administration and guesswork to be able to say, hey, I'm a really great rehabber. I don't have to have a construction background, but how can I use tools, spreadsheets, walkthroughs, not be excited about things, get my emotions under control, and then also use some AI to be able to become more proficient.
Yeah. Tracy, you made me think about one of my favorite movies is The Matrix. And I always quote this. So people listen to my show a lot are going to know they kind of get tired of this analogy. But when I talk about bookkeeping and running the numbers, I always say, well, you remember Neo in The Matrix was like the superhero person who the whole world slowed down and he saw everything in zeros and ones, like everything around him. And he could like stop bullets. And I feel like what you're talking about there, this is a good wrap up point, because when you know your numbers and when you're analytical and you have good spreadsheets, it's a little harder on the front end. It takes a little bit more effort and time. But now more than ever, you can plug that into AI. You can study your trends. You can say, here's the last 10 remodels I did, and my cost on flooring was this every single time. Like, that's a superhero quality when you can start doing that, because then you start learning, then you start improving, then you start making a difference. If you want to be a teacher like Tracy or I do, then you can start teaching the stuff. That's a really cool opportunity. So with that said, you mentioned earlier that you have a walkthrough spreadsheet that people can get and they can like make their own scopes. So I'm going to put a link to that into your school community below. Mm-hmm. Where else can people hang out with you, connect with you? I follow your Instagram channel. I think that's an awesome place to connect with you, and you share your some of your design ideas and your remodel, your advice tips. So I'm definitely going to put that in there. Where would you like people to connect with you?
I'm most active on Instagram, but wherever you guys are, you can find me under the handle Royce of Real Estate. I, again, am most active on Insta, but you can also find me on TikTok. Go to my website if you want to find out a little bit more about our school community. And in fact, you can find that under my link in bio on my Instagram as well. The freebies to get started with, if you want that walkthrough guide, you can click that link too and come into our school community. And yeah, you'll find some really cool resources there. And I love your matrix analogy, because it's like, yeah, when you really have an elegant, simple model that's supported with systems and processes, you can do like the backwards cool cape. Everything slows down. I know how to fight the what were the bad guys called?
The agent. Well, there's Agent Smith and I don't even remember what their names are now, but Agent Smith. Yeah, they're basically programs, software programs. So you can stop them.
The point where we can fight all the bad agents and become the hero.
Exactly. Well, Tracy, thank you. I admire what you're up to and the work you do, and you're a teacher at heart, which I love as well. So thank you for your time, and look forward to staying in touch.
It's been my pleasure. Thanks so much.
So in this episode, we talked all about building a scope of work and a budget so that before you buy a rental property, you don't make a big mistake. But we didn't talk a lot about, once you own a rental property, what are the best brands? What are the best materials? Like, what kind of heating and air units do you use? What kind of flooring do you use? So I want to recommend my next video and episode where I interview a landlord who has over 130 properties, and he has very strong opinions, which I love, about which brands to use, what type of materials to use. So you can just take notes and learn a lot from him. So if you're watching on YouTube, click on the thumbnail above me here, or you can click on the link in the YouTube or the podcast description below to go to that next episode with someone named the Lumberjack Landlord. I think you'll really enjoy it. Thank you so much for watching this episode, and I'll see you next time.